So first, I would like to thank our QA unit led by Chief Tina Brand for all of your hard work in coordinating this with our VR Tech QM partners, Bill Colombo and Crystal Gary. I understand what it means to put together a training of this magnitude. I'm excited to see so many DVRS team members signed on and still signing on, right? The count is already at 146 and still growing. So I hope that everyone is engaged and ready to take on this three-part training series. It is something that our agency needs. We are in a paradigm shift, and I hope that everyone is excited about the direction that our agency is going. So sit back and make sure you ask your questions in real time. Don't hesitate. I am sure you will be encouraged to do that throughout each session, but please do not hesitate to ask your questions in real time. I will be a part of the training as much as I can, and I look forward to hearing what our partners have to share. So thank you so much for these few minutes. And Tina, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Felicia, for mentioning the questions and the chat. Initially, this training, we were hoping to do those 3 modules over a 2-day span. And you guys spoke and said, hey, we want to do this virtually. So we encourage you to use that chat. We're going to try to get to questions. If we can't, please know that we will take all. I'm so sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Felicia. Again, I just wanted to mention that please do use the chat. We were hoping to spread these modules out in person over those few days. So we're whittling down this information a little bit today. We have a lot to cover. We still encourage lots of questions. And if we don't get to every question, don't worry. We will absolutely go through those at the end and make sure that we send the questions and replies out to you. Through the presentation, we'll be making sure you can turn off your cameras. We're going to have things muted, but please use the chat for your questions. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Colombo, who is with VR Tech Quality Management. He will be our primary presenter this morning.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Felicia. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the basics of WIOA Performance Accountability System, with an emphasis on the word system, more to come. So we want to express our appreciation to Director Hobson for having us. And again, as was mentioned, we really appreciate the work that Tina, Rachel, Dina, everyone has put into supporting the training and setting up all the coordination. It's not an easy task. So thank you so much for that. And we wanted to start by just jumping in with a quick round of introductions. So Crystal, do you want to jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I am Crystal Gary. I like to describe myself as the one who probably is all up in everyone's business and the one who keeps up the most trouble on the VR Tech QM. So I still describe myself as a baby in VR. Because I haven't been in VR 30 years or so. I think now I have been with the TAC for almost 5 years, almost the entirety of the grant. But prior to joining the TAC, I was with Arkansas Blind, overseeing all of the quality assurance at that agency. And I will say within that agency, under the quality assurance unit, we were responsible for all of the case system management administration, responsible for all of the data analyses and reporting, also responsible for all of the statewide training and technical assistance as it related to all of WIOA performance accountability, all of those pieces there. Prior to joining the VR world, I came from the private sector. I was in organizational development and training. So I came into the VR world talking a lot about strategic planning and things of that sort. So most of my former colleagues were like, who is this girl and where did you get her from? Send her back right now because she's saying all of these crazy things. So anywho, I have enjoyed my time in the VR world. I have fallen immensely in love with what is done over here in the VR, and I have such a great respect for you all as professionals, what you're doing for the citizens you serve. Um, and I'm just happy to have a seat at the table. And so that's kind of my quick little spiel for right now, Bill. Thanks.
Thank you, Crystal. So again, my name is Bill Colombo, and this is year 31 in the VR profession for me. I've had kind of a potpourri of roles and positions in my career. I did start out as a VR counselor in northern rural Michigan, serving 3 counties, the whole population, general, transition students, the entire population in all 3 counties. I later became a transition counselor, which was one of my favorite jobs, providing transition services to students in 16 local school districts with really a large support team to do so. I moved on to be an internal consultant, or what you might consider a specialist, focusing on program development, really building partnerships with a variety of entities, including schools, mental health providers, and businesses, and then focusing on creating match agreements to draw down federal funds. I moved on from that to be a division director overseeing program innovation in our case management system, which incidentally was aware and continues to be, and then was also responsible for federal reporting. And then finally, before leaving state employment, I served as the state agency deputy director before joining the VRTAC QM team to specialize in the types of stuff we're going to talk about today, program and performance type of activities, and been doing that for this is year number 4 for me. So with that, with our introductions done, I think Crystal and I are going to go off camera for the remainder of the presentation, so we're not distracting ourselves by looking at ourselves in the frames. Few housekeeping items. First of all, get coffee. Federal regs definitely mandated. This is a rather dry topic, so a better option may be Red Bull, if you're into that. This session kicks off a 3-part training series on performance accountability, internal controls, and data validation. And some of this is to acclimate those who have not been exposed to it before. Some of it is to help address some of the corrective actions in your monitoring as well. We're going to be using live polling, so please have your phone available to submit text responses, and we'll get connected in just a second. And feel free to drop questions in the chat. Some may be addressed during the presentation, and as mentioned, we'll follow up in writing with the rest as appropriate. And then we'll take one quick 5-minute break near the top of the hour for just a brain rest and refresh. So thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate that, and let's jump into it. So cracking open performance accountability. Once we unpack this nutshell, and this is the nutshell version, as mentioned, we were going to provide this in person, but we've scaled it down to be able to deliver it in a virtual format as well. So please consider this a nutshell version, but of critical information that's important to understanding performance accountability overall. So hopefully you'll gain either a new, if you've not been exposed to this before, or a deeper understanding of the basic components of the WIOA performance accountability system, which includes the common performance indicators or measures, reporting expectations, including the annual report, also known as the ETA 9169, and the case services report, or the RSA 911, and the negotiation and sanction requirements outlined in Section 116 of the Act, also detailed in RSA TAC 2002. And I'm going to talk more about what TACs are shortly. And then two, we want to touch on the essential role and value of data and assure you that it's not a dirty word in the VR program. Data is essential for telling your story, and it's something that is certainly not going away anytime in the near future. So let's be honest, because this is the elephant in the room. WIOA performance is really anything but simple. And actually, it's pretty darn complex. So I've been talking about it since 2014 when WIOA was enacted. And quite honestly, I am still learning new things today. When WIOA showed up, it really hit like a tidal wave for me, and really for probably many of you who were around back then. It was and continues to be the biggest single change we've ever seen in VR. And I wanted to acknowledge that. The stuff that we're going to talk about over the next 3 sessions is complex. We understand that, we get that, and we understand on the receiving end that it's not a simple program to deliver. So let's get connected. How to respond to live polling. So if you could pull your phones out, I'll walk through the steps that are necessary to engage in the live polling. First, in the to field, enter the number 37607. Again, in the to field, enter the number 37607. Once you've done that, in the message field, enter Bill C 200. Again, in the message field, enter Bill C 200. Once you've done that, you should ultimately receive a message that you've joined Bill Colombo's session, Bill C 200. When you're done, reply leave. Don't do that. Don't reply leave. Throughout the course of today, once you're in, and you can type your responses to the live polls for each of the polls that we use. Give everyone a second to do that and leave this up. Okay, let's move on to our first live poll. What's your level of knowledge regarding the performance accountability requirements under WIOA? A, none. Geez, I don't even understand the question. B, some, kind of like hearing half a joke. I'm smiling, but I'm not entirely sure why. C, average. I got a handle on it like a wet bar of soap. And D, expert. Drop the mic now. Honestly, I should probably be leading this training. See, lots of people are connected, so this is great. And it's shaking out like it's a close tie between B, kind of like hearing half a joke. I'm smiling, but I'm not entirely sure why. Well, that's taking the lead at 44%. So let's go with that. So perfect. The training is ideally suited for the responses that we're seeing in the first poll. Some of you may have heard of the golden circle theory. Chances are maybe some of you are nodding. And for those that haven't, it's a really simple concept by Simon Sinek. And Simon is best known for his TED Talk on the topic. It's been viewed nearly 68 million times, and it's worth a watch. There's a link in the slide deck in the lower right-hand corner at some point if you want to take a peek at it. And the golden circle explains how great leaders inspire action by consistently starting with why. So let's get to kind of the big why of it. By moving through the golden circle from the outside in, beginning with what. So what, or the outermost circle. Every organization on the planet knows what they do. These are either the products they sell or the services that they provide. In VR, we're service providers. We provide the 21 allowable VR services, plus the 5 required pre-ed services defined in the regs at 34 CFR 361.48, or that's the scope of VR services for individuals with disabilities. Next, how some organizations know how they do it. These are the things that make them special or set them apart. For VR, much of how is predicated on federal regulations, on sub-regulatory guidance, and on really your agency policies and procedures. But there are other things that set us apart. So maybe these are most important, and it's our unique training, our degrees, our certificates, our general subject matter expertise that's acquired over years. And maybe most importantly for many of us, it's our direct personal experience with disability, either personally or through family members or friends. And these are the types of things that make us VR professionals unique or set us apart, particularly different from our WIA program partners. And then the innermost circle is why. Very few organizations know why they do what they do. And why is the purpose? It's the cause or the belief. It's the very reason an organization exists. So Cynic believes that leaders and organizations with the capacity to inspire all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. They start with their why. And that is putting purpose first to communicate in a way that drives decisions and behaviors. So what's your why? Or better, what's really our collective why? To understand that, let's take a quick look back at unfinished business as part of understanding our collective why. In 2012, the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions held hearings to examine the persistently low workforce participation rate among people with disabilities. The outcome was a report titled Unfinished Business, Making Employment of People with Disabilities a National Priority. It became widely known as the Harkin Report, named after the committee chair, Senator Tom Harkin. And Harkin has been he's no longer a senator, but he has been an advocate for people with disabilities throughout the course of his career in politics, and largely because his brother Frank was deaf from a very early age. So the report painted a pretty stark picture of the employment landscape, really, despite progress in accessibility since the ADA passage in 1990. Employment outcomes for people with disabilities really continued to lag. Here's a quote from the report. There's no evidence that the employment outcomes for people with disabilities as a whole have improved since 1990, or the passage of the ADA. In June of 2012, the year that the report was published, the labor force participation rate for working age adults with disabilities was 32.1%. At the same time, the labor force participation rate for working age adults without disabilities was 77.7%. Quite a discrepancy. So why is this relevant? Because the report laid the foundation for what would become the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act by introducing the following. Foremost, competitive integrated employment as the goal. Other recommendations included creating high expectations to boost confidence, self-sufficiency, and access to quality employment and upward mobility. provide introductory work experiences, paid or unpaid, including internships, youth work, and service learning. Align efforts with public and private workforce needs through partnerships and preparation pipelines, which would become the dual customer concept. And encourage post-secondary and technical education, which would become MSG and credential attainment. So the Harkin report really laid the foundation for what would become WIOA. So despite the intentions and steady progress, the inequity gap remains. It's very persistent. So what we're looking at right now is a bar chart and a table of two prominent and telling measures: employment and poverty. And this is from the 2025 Disability Compendium, which is an annual publication on disability statistics by the University of New Hampshire. A lot of VR agencies utilize the data that's in the compendium for purposes of completing their state plan. It's packed full of really useful information. And there's a link to it in the lower right-hand corner of this slide. So let me share the statistics, both nationally and New Jersey. If you have a disability, the percentage of employment nationally now is 46.3%. In New Jersey, it's 48%. If you don't have a disability, again, nationally, it's 79.5%. In New Jersey, slightly above, 80.5%. Now let's look at poverty. Nationally, if you have a disability, the percentage in poverty is 24.2%, and in New Jersey, it's 19%. If you don't have a disability, percentage of poverty nationally is 9.9%, and in New Jersey, slightly lower, 7.5%. So remember, in June of 2012, the labor force participation rate with a disability was 32.1%. And without a disability, it was 77.7%. So although there has been improvements, the inequity gap is persistent. So why is the very reason your agency exists? Number one, you are mission driven. So your mission says, enable eligible individuals with disabilities to achieve an employment outcome consistent with their strengths, priorities, needs, abilities, and capabilities. Another part of our why is the intent of WIOA, which is high quality employment. And that is to provide individuals with disabilities the services they need to compete for and achieve high quality employment in the 21st century global economy. And the final part of our collective why is to close the gap between those that have disabilities and those that don't have disabilities in every sector. So we've established our why. I want to move on to some general information to provide an overview of the federal VR structure. So here's a look at our VR family tree, or org chart, if you will. The federal administration and oversight of the VR program currently falls under the U.S. Department of Education. Within the Department of Education is the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, often called OSERS. OSERS is the home of RSA, or the Rehabilitation Services Administration, or in our family tree, this is our mommy and daddy. That is who we answer to. And then finally, under the Rehabilitation Services Administration, there are 78 state vocational rehabilitation agencies. That includes general, blind, and combined agencies in all the states and the U.S. territories. And since we're talking about the intersection of the law, regulations, policies, procedures, and internal controls. Let's just start with an overview of that. So at the very top, as you all know, the U.S. law that aligns the workforce investment, education, and economic development systems is WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So once an act is enacted, what happens to operationalize it? It's typically too vague to be able to operationalize it. So an act passes, it then goes to the department or the agency within the department that is responsible for interpreting the act. So in this case, the act goes to RSA. RSA then interprets the law and creates regulations. So regulations represent, really more than anything, an operational manual. It's how to operationalize what's identified or laid out in the act. So RSA created regulations, and those regulations were not available in 2016. So the act passed in 2014. Regulations then were provided by RSA in 2016. Over that period of time, VR agencies did the best that they could to interpret what the act meant. Oftentimes, regulations lack detail to go even deeper to be able to effectively operationalize what the intent is. And the way that guidance is provided is in the form of sub-regulatory guidance. Much of what we're going to talk about has to do with sub-regulatory guidance. And that comes in the form of technical assistance circulars, or TACs, Dear Colleague letters, or DCLs, and policy directives, or PDs. So regulations would be kind of akin to your owner's manual. And then sub-regulatory guidance would be the detail in today's terms that would be available, for example, on YouTube. It's really more detailed how to operationalize something or accomplish something. So again, much of what we're talking about today comes in the forms of TACs, DCLs, and PDs. And then finally, that information, that guidance goes to the state VR agencies. And it is up to typically leadership, the policy unit, to interpret the federal regulations and sub-regulatory guidance and create, number one, state plans, but also write policies, procedures, and internal controls that are consistent with those regulatory requirements. So you may think that central office is making stuff up, but in fact, they are not. In terms of providing policies and procedures, it's intended to operationalize both the regulations and sub-regulatory guidance. So that's a quick overview of kind of the intersection of how laws, regulations, and policies intersect and interact. Along with that, each VR agency receives federal matching funds. So for federal fiscal year 2025, you've been allocated $27,818,484. And the matching ratio for vocational rehabilitation is 21.3 non-federal to 78.7 federal. That means states have to put up 21.3% of the funds, and it's typically through general funds, but there are a variety of different ways to do that, to be able to draw down a 78.7% match, which means that your state share was about $7,500,000, somewhere in that neck of the woods. Those funds can be utilized on authorized activities, and that is for the provision of the VR services, and the administration of the VR program, which includes your operational costs, things like your salaries, wages, covering costs for buildings, your indirect costs, things like supplies. Those fall under administrative costs. So VR is unique in that match percentage. It's really much higher than most federal programs that receive match funds. So with that, there is really a higher level of oversight, and it comes with strings attached, and those are the regulatory requirements. So RSA, the means to be able to check that is through RSA monitoring and state single audits. So every year within your state, there is a state single audit that comes in and takes a look at the VR program. Typically, it's targeted. And that serves as the check on the compliance with those regulatory requirements. So you recently went through monitoring, and one of the findings has to do with what we're talking about today. And it was finding 2.1.1 that requires a corrective action. And that largely has to do with the accuracy and validity of your federal reporting around some of the performance measures and the services that you provide. So part of what we're going to be talking about over the course of the next 3 days will cover that, and particularly as it relates to data validation, which we're going to talk about more next Tuesday. So a couple final comments related to the act. So again, I mentioned that it was enacted in 2014. Regs didn't come out until 2016. And again, the act is really intended to provide individuals with disabilities the services they need to compete for and achieve, really focusing on high and emphasizing high quality employment in the 21st century global economy. I do want to mention that there was something else that was significant that occurred in 2014. And that was the enactment of 2 CFR 200. And that's simply a code in the federal regulations, but it was significant. And it's the uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards enacted in federal regulations. So 2 CFR 200 introduced the concept of internal controls that was really kind of foreign to VR prior to that time. 2 CFR consolidated all departments, all of the administrative requirements for all departments into one uniform guidance section. And prior to that, every department had their own kind of uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements. And that's significant. So internal controls has become a significant part in terms of monitoring findings in what we, VR agencies, are responsible for ensuring are in place. And in terms of monitoring, it has risen to the #1 monitoring finding for all VR agencies. There are more findings related to internal controls in RSA monitoring than anything else by far. So I did want to mention that as well. That was a significant change that occurred in 2014 and has had significant impact on VR agencies since that time. And then the other piece that the act did that I just want to emphasize is really strengthen the alignment of the workforce development system through unified strategic planning, common performance measures, and the one-stop delivery system requirements. So prior to WIOA, there was WIA, which was the Workforce Innovation Act. And that act did not bring workforce programs together really under a clear shared strategy. So partners were often ended up working at cross purposes instead of toward common goals. And WIOA really aligned all of workforce development systems and pushing everyone in the same direction. All right, that's all of the introductory information. It kind of sets the stage for performance accountability. I want to jump into performance accountability and talk about terms, definitions, and review the indicators in detail, and specifically talk about the calculations. So you begin to understand how performance is calculated and everything that makes up the performance calculations for each of those indicators. So the WIOA Performance Accountability System, Section 116 of WIOA establishes performance accountability indicators, the performance reporting requirements to assess the effectiveness of states and local areas. Local areas has nothing to do with VR. That's specific to our other workforce partners in labor. In achieving positive outcomes for individuals served by the workforce development system's 6 core programs. And specifically for VR, this includes the 6 primary indicators of performance. And this is outlined in RSA TAC. Again, that's a Technical Assistance Circular 1701. This TAC has been updated multiple times. And I provided Tina the current version of TAC 1701 with my highlights and notes for distribution following the training. If you take nothing else away from this training, I would highly encourage you to take TAC 1701 away. And it's not necessary even to review the whole Technical Assistance Circular. If you just take a look at notes and highlights, it provides an excellent understanding of the WIOA Performance Accountability System. So if you have questions relative to performance, that should be your first stop in trying to understand the performance accountability system. So in addition to that, Section 116 outlines the annual and quarterly reports and performance calculations. Also in this area, we have the RSA quarterly data dashboards. There are a variety of data tools and other resources. Plus, there is the WIOA sub-regulatory guidance and technical assistance resources that are available through RSA. There's an accountability page on RSA's website that's very informative. And then also it's the technical assistance that is provided by the technical assistance centers as well. I do want to emphasize, again, kind of going back to sub-regulatory guidance, I didn't list it all here, but it is a system, as the heading on this slide indicates. So there are 5 different technical assistance circulars or dear colleague letters that really encompass that system. The first and most important, as I mentioned, is RSA TAC 1701, which is the Performance Accountability Guidance. And again, that's been reissued multiple times. The most recent version is from 2004 or 2024. Other guidance includes RSA DCL or Dear Colleague Letter 2304, which is the instructions for the completion of the case service report, and that's the 911. Also, RSA TAC 2002, which was recently reissued, has to do with how performance is negotiated and how sanctions are applied. So it's the negotiations and sanction guidance. And then there is RSA TAC 1901, and that's the guidance for validating joint required performance data or the source documentation requirements in simpler terms. And we're going to talk more about that on Tuesday. That's a required training and is required to be provided annually. And it's really role specific, but we're going to do the general training as an introduction to the data validation requirements. And then the final TAC is the use of supplemental wage data. And that's guidance on the types of documentation that's allowable when you can't use UI wage data matches to secure the source documentation required for performance reporting. So when I talk about it being a system, it is a system and it's complex again. But if you want to learn one thing about performance accountability, RSA Tac 1701 is the ticket. So every state vocational rehabilitation agency is unique. And just like the individuals we serve, you have unique strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, and interests. We often get asked, just tell us how to do it. But there's no one size fits all approach. Well, there are best practices, and I'm going to touch on some of those. And none of them are secrets at this point. Every agency ultimately develops its own how-tos and documents them through policies, procedures, and internal controls. So I wanted to state that up front. Often when we do this training, we get asked, just tell us how to do it. And that's simply not the intent. The intent is to provide the what, and the how is really agency specific and unique. And I wanted to state that up front. So some key terms and definitions. What is the RSA 911 case service report? So number one, it's a mandated report submitted quarterly by all state VR agencies. RSA maintains this system of records for the purposes of our conversation, performance accountability, but also research, monitoring, and evaluation purposes required by the Act. And this system contains information on individuals who are participating in or who have exited from the VR and supported employment programs. What's a data element? It's a unit of data collected through the RSA 911 case service report. And there are 316 data elements in the RSA 911. Not all of those are completed all the time. It's entirely dependent on where an individual is in the VR process. So your case management system, aware the entries that you have in that or that you make in it are coded in the background by Dina and the IT team to match corresponding data elements in the RSA 911. And then finally, what is an exit cohort? This is a confusing topic, and we're going to talk more about it, but it is particularly relevant to performance reporting. So an exit cohort is the group of participants who exit during the same quarter. Various participant exit cohorts are included in the WIOA annual report and your agency performance rates. And again, exit cohorts are complex and confusing, so I'm going to provide a concrete example about that shortly. More terms and definitions. Who might be a reportable individual? So a reportable is a person who has taken action that demonstrates an intent to use program services. The individual has provided some identifying information. There are 3 points in the VR process that trigger someone being a reportable for federal reporting purposes. One, a potentially eligible student with a disability receiving pre-employment services. So they would be considered a reportable. There is reporting requirements for those individuals. Second is when someone becomes an applicant, and applicants have expressed an intent to use VR services. And then the third is if someone is determined to be eligible. So this is prior to an individualized plan for employment being created and the receipt of services under the IPE. So those are the 3 instances in which someone is considered a reportable. And there are data elements in the RSA 911 to collect the information, and reporting is required for these elements. So a question, do reportable individuals count towards levels of performance? They do not. So we're required to collect the data, but reportable individuals do not count towards meeting your performance levels. Participant. So what must happen for someone to be considered a participant? And there are 3 actions. Really, 2 are the most significant. So the first is you have to be reportable, which makes sense. Someone needs to apply for services and be determined eligible before they can become a participant. But the 2 that are most important is that there needs to be an approved and signed individualized plan for employment. And then the final piece that triggers somebody becoming a reportable is that they've begun to receive services under an IPE. And this particular item triggers data element 127, which is the start date of the initial VR services on or after an IPE. So why do participants matter? It's because only participants are included in the performance calculations for determining levels of performance for the primary indicators. So participants count. That's important to remember. So once someone has a signed approved IPE and has been provided a service that triggers that data element 127, they become a participant and they count towards performance. Another term, program exit. There are 3 types of program exit. The first is successful competitive integrated employment. So this is a participant. Again, a participant is someone who has a plan, received a service, and exited with competitive integrated employment outcome. The second is unsuccessful. And this is a participant who received services under an IPE and exited without an employment outcome. And the final is exclusive to VR. It's a participant who received services under an IPE and was later determined ineligible for the VR program. And I have an asterisk next to this description because this is considered a performance exclusion. And I want to talk about exclusions a little bit later and the importance of exclusions relative to performance. So there are 3 types of program exits. I think the one that is most significant is unsuccessful because you can have a participant who exits the program unsuccessfully. You've provided a service. They've met the requirement to be considered a participant. You had a plan, you provided a service. Someone can exit unsuccessful. They go on to become employed 2nd or 4th quarter after exit, and they still count positively towards your level of performance. And prior to WIOA, that was not the case. You know, there could have been significant investments in terms of staff time and financial investments in terms of the provision of services, and individuals would exit unsuccessful, and that would not count towards performance in any way. So the unsuccessful closure or exit represents an opportunity under WIOA for those individuals to count because you have provided a service that potentially and ideally had a positive impact in terms of an employment outcome. Other changes under WIOA. Prior to WIOA, both the program and fiscal year were the same. Under WIOA, that has changed. The federal fiscal year is still October 1st to September 30th. And the program year is July 1st to June 30th. So we're in quarter 4 of program year 2024 at this point. And we'll talk more about program years in the example I'm going to share. But program year is when performance counts. So I want to talk about the ultimate calculation and the primary indicators of performance. Aside from median earnings, which is second quarter after exit. Understanding performance is calculated through dividing numerators or the total number achieved by denominators or the total eligible. It's strictly assumption, but some of us may have entered our profession without a love of math. If we look at the ONET description for rehabilitation counselor, it's things like active listening or critical thinking. It's certainly not math. So understanding numerators and denominators may be something that's a bit foreign for some of us, including myself. It took me quite a while to really embrace that. So here's a very simplistic example of the ultimate performance calculation. In the graphic, there are 4 participants who exited. Those are the individuals that were eligible to count towards a performance indicator, or the denominator. And there is one individual who was employed second quarter after exit, or the numerator. Those are the individuals that achieved. So in this example, 1 divided by 4, numerator divided by denominator equals 25%. The actual level of performance would be 25%. So embracing numerators, denominators is really important to understanding how performance calculations occur. So we currently have 6 primary indicators of performance. First is employment rate second quarter after exit. Second, employment rate fourth quarter after exit. Median earnings second quarter after exit. That's not determined by the ultimate calculation. Median is very straightforward. I'm going to bring up an example of that shortly, but that's the exclusion to the performance calculation. Otherwise, all 6 or all 5 of the remaining indicators utilize numerators, denominators in the calculation example that we just went over. So in addition to median earnings, we have credential attainment, we have measurable skill gains, and the most recently added indicator is effectiveness in serving employers. Currently, the effectiveness in serving employers is in a process of establishing a baseline. And that's for purposes of utilizing the statistical adjustment model and determining levels of performance, which I'm going to provide more information about that shortly, so you understand the role of the statistical adjustment model as well. But effectiveness in serving employers is not going to be assessed for program year 2024. Again, you have to have a baseline of information for the SAM, or statistical adjustment model, and RSA is in the process of establishing that baseline. So these are the 6 indicators of performance, and I want to break down each one of these. Prior to doing that, I just want to emphasize what, again, a tidal wave of change WIOA was versus WIOA. It really is a significant paradigm shift. And not only a paradigm shift, it's a mindset shift. So really one of the primary goals of WIOA was simply jobs. It was 90 days of employment. Some of the indicators or measures under WIOA were change in employment from a prior year. So often we would sit down, we would negotiate what our performance goals would be. And quite simply, it just had to be one more than the previous year. Under WIOA, there is a fundamental shift with the focus on, as I mentioned right in the very beginning, independence, long-term support, skills and training in really careers, focusing on high quality employment. And the intent behind this was to break the cycle of the revolving door. For the most part, under WIA, a lot of the jobs, or a majority of jobs that customers ended up in, were considered entry-level employment. And really kind of a derogatory way of describing it was food, filth, and flowers types of jobs. So I just wanted to focus on this as a reminder, the goals that we just looked at, the performance indicators that we just looked at are intended to achieve the outcome under WIOA as independence, long-term success, skills and training development, and careers, high-quality employment. So let's do a quick poll as we get into understanding performance and particularly cohorts. How many quarters must a VR agency submit an RSA 911 report for participants who exit the program and are included in the performance calculation? A, it depends on the participant. B, 1, only the exit quarter. C, 4 quarters after exit. D, 6 quarters after exit. If you could just enter that in your phone and submit it, that'd be great. Still calculating. And the high response is clearly 4 quarters after exit at 72% right now. The real answer is 6 quarters after exit. And we're going to break that down step by step so you fully understand that. So it's the top of the hour. This is an opportune time for the 5-minute break that we promised. So let's take a quick 5 minutes. I'm going to jump back in we'll go right at 5 after, because this is an opportune time for a break. So let's take 5 minutes, get some water, have a brain refresh. It's been a fire hose of information so far, and take a rest break. And we'll be back at 5 minutes after. So let's take a look at each of the performance indicators and have just a brief discussion about each one. So employment rate second quarter after exit. How is it calculated? So numerator divided by denominator. Remember, total achieved divided by total eligible. So in the numerator, it's the number of participants. Again, a participant is someone who has a signed plan and been provided a service who exited during the program year, who are found to be employed either through direct UI wage records, federal or military employment records, or supplemental wage information in the second quarter after the exit quarter, divided by the total number of participants who exited during the program year. So the primary source documentation for employment rate, second and fourth quarter after exit, and median earnings second quarter after exit, it's typically the UI wage information. There are some times where you may have participants that move out of state and secure employment. And in that case, there's something called the Swiss agreement or state wage interchange system, which is a system that allows, for example, New Jersey to obtain UI wage information from Michigan or any other state for that matter. All VR agencies have agreements, so there is interstate sharing of wage information. So those are the two primary sources of documentation for this particular indicator. Sometimes there may be a need for supplemental wage information, and that would be the case if someone, for example, didn't want to provide their Social Security number or that they're self-employed, where there wouldn't be UI information. And in those scenarios, things like copies of maybe like a quarterly tax payment form to the IRS or pay stubs, signed letters from employers, things of that nature are typically the type of documentation that's required to verify employment second quarter after exit. So I talked about cohorts. I want to explain it. And if you remember in the poll that we just did, a majority of you thought that reporting only occurs for 4 quarters post-exit. So this is a good example of how it works. So in this example, I'm going to walk through each one of the quarters. And let's take, for example, that a participant exits this quarter, which is program year 24, quarter 4, which is the period between April and June of this year. That's considered the exit cohort. So anyone that exits as a participant during that period of time, this is their exit cohort. So the first quarter after exit would be program year 25, quarter 1, or the period of July through September. Nothing happens during that quarter. Second quarter after exit, this is the measure quarter, which would be during program year 25, quarter 2, or if someone is working during the period of October through December, that's the measure period. And the state vocational rehabilitation agency must verify employment. The third quarter after exit is considered a lag quarter. So if someone is working second quarter, it must be verified. It takes an employer another quarter to get that verification to UI. So that's a lag quarter. It's considered a UI lag quarter. So that would be third quarter after exit. It would be program year 25, quarter 4, the period of January through March. And finally, the fourth quarter after exit, which would be program year 25, quarter 4, the period April through June, would be when second quarter after exit reporting is due, and that's when it counts. So for those that are exiting this quarter, right now, let's say, second quarter after exit measure period would be between October and December of this year, and they would count for your program year 25 performance measures, because that information would not be received until April or June of program year 25, which is a year from now. Okay, so that's second quarter after exit. Let me move on to fourth quarter after exit. You know, the numerators and denominators are the same for this, with the exception that the measure period is fourth quarter after exit. So if we pick up on our example, we're now at a point where we have participant who exits program year 24, quarter 4, April through June. So this year, this month is their exit cohort. Their measure quarter for fourth quarter after exit employment would be program year 25, quarter 4, or April through June of next year. A year from now would be the measure quarter. And then again, there's the same lag period where employers report to UI wages. And then finally, UI provides VR, or the core program that's collecting and distributing that information or data. It would be the sixth quarter after exit, which would be program year 26, quarter 2, October through December, is when the report is due, and they would count for program year 26. So this is why cohorts and understanding cohorts is important. And it's a challenging concept to understand that those individuals that are exiting this quarter aren't going to count until next program year or the following program year for your performance levels. I do have a tool that will be available on our website. I'll just bring it over here real quick so you can take a look at it. So for example, you can select the submission quarter for your RSA 911 and determine when these individuals. So if I was submitting for program year 24, quarter 4, which is this quarter, I can see the program years and quarters of exit for which will be counted for performance. Pretty useful tool, and we'll throw this up on our website as soon as it's approved. RSA has taken a look at it and they like it. So it's helpful for understanding cohorts and when they count. Okay, moving on to the next Performance indicator, median earnings, second quarter after exit. This is pretty straightforward. It's the total quarterly earnings for all participants employed in the second quarter after exit, listed in order from the lowest to the highest. The value in the middle of this list is the median earnings value, where there is the same quantity of numbers above the median number as there is below the median number. So it's the number that's in the middle. Sometimes this is confused as an average. A median is not the average. And one of the reasons why RSA selected median, or the Act utilizes median as the measure, is that it guards against outliers. So outliers pull an average much higher and are a more inaccurate reflection of earnings than utilizing the median. But that's fairly simple, straightforward, simply the number that is in the middle. And that's determined annually. You guys have done very well with median earnings. And particularly because I think one of the reasons is that your minimum wage is higher than most states as well. But it's a quick review of median. And then we get into what are the most confusing of the indicators: credential attainment and measurable skill gains. So let's talk about credential attainment real quick. Who's in the numerator for credential attainment, or those that achieved? Well, it's the number of participants, we talked about participants, who exited during the program year who obtained a recognized post-secondary credential during the program or within 1 year after exit. Or, and this is specific to VR only, those who were in a secondary education program and obtained a secondary school diploma or its recognized equivalent, which can be a GED, if that's what they call it in New Jersey, during the program year or within 1 year after exit. And then there is an operational parameter, is what this is called. So it's a caveat. It's an additional requirement for those who receive a diploma or recognized equivalent or GED to count. They also have to be employed or in an education or training program leading to a recognized post-secondary credential within 1 year after exit from the VR program. So again, the same tracking is relevant to this particular indicator, specifically as it relates to employment. So again, looking at, they also need to be employed or an education or training program within 1 year of exit. And that employment information isn't available until up to the 6th quarter after exit. Some questions that agencies have to do with, how do I get post-secondary information or credential information after exit? And there are a couple of resources that are available that agencies have begun to utilize. One is the National Student Clearinghouse, and that is simply a clearinghouse of educational information for all post-secondary institutions. And it represents an allowable source documentation to secure documentation that someone is or has obtained is enrolled or has obtained a diploma in a institution of higher education. It does require a agreement with them. There is a training that is on NTAC-Cs, or the National the Technical Assistance Center for Transition, on their website that was recently done on the National Student Clearinghouse. And it's really a useful bit of information. We've been doing some work with them. We're going to be providing more information about the acceptable source documentation that they provide, and we'll send that out or make it available on our website as an FAQ. I've got a couple links in the quarter of this particular slide as well. One is to the Workforce GPS Credential Attainment resource page. There is a post-secondary credential attainment tool on that page that allows you to work through step by step to determine whether or not something is a recognized credential. So it might be a first step if you have questions, is or isn't it a recognized credential? You can go to that website, work through kind of the decision tree, and determine whether or not it is a recognized credential. And then in addition to that, there is a link to a credential attainment guide for state VR agencies. We've provided that in the past. I don't know if it has been distributed, but it is available on our website and is useful in reviewing the requirements to determine what constitutes a recognized credential. Okay, so another poll. Which of the following is not considered a recognized credential? A secondary school diploma or recognized equivalent. B, an associate or bachelor's degree. C, graduate degree. D, an occupational license. E, ServSafe food handling certification. Or F, occupational certificate, including registered apprenticeship and career and technical education educational certificates. %91% or 90% of you have the right answer. It's a ServSafe food handling certification. And we're going to talk more about why that is not considered a recognized credential in just a bit. But most of you are right, so congratulations. So a few essential points about a recognized credential. So again, this indicator measures attainment of two types of credentials. Either a recognized post-secondary credential or a secondary school diploma or its recognized equivalent. A recognized post-secondary credential is defined as a credential consisting of what we just went through on the poll: an associate, bachelor, or graduate degree, a industry recognized certificate or certification, a certificate of completion of an apprenticeship, or a license recognized by a state involved or federal government. And then this is a reminder, all credentials require supporting source documentation for it to count. And this is true for measurable skill gains as well, and a number of the other indicators. When RSA did their monitoring, historically, they would do case reviews. They would pull 30 cases and go over them with a fine-tooth comb. They don't do that so much, but they are still pulling cases. And when they are on site with your agency, they did pull 10, and they noted that there were deficiencies in source documentation being in the file. There was for 3, and then 7 of them lacked the source documentation for the specific indicator. So it's something to be aware of, because it doesn't count for performance purposes if the source documentation is not present. And that can be a variety of formats. It could be hard copy, it could be electronic format as well. Other essential points: credentials are documented when they're achieved. So it's the date on that credential by the participant. It's not the date that the VRC receives the supporting documentation. So there can be inconsistencies in reporting. If what's noted in AWARE, the date that you receive the documentation versus the date that's identified on the documentation of when the credential was achieved. Participants can earn more than one credential, but it only counts in the numerator once, and it's for the highest credential achieved for federal reporting purposes. So just an interesting note that you may not have known. Similar to all services reported on the 9/11, a recognized educational training program needs to be identified on the IPE, and this is true for MSG as well, in order to document the credential earned, including secondary school diploma or its recognized in equivalent. So we talked about ServSafe. What's not a credential? So certificates must be recognized technical or industry occupational skills for the specific industry or occupation. They are not general skills related to safety or hygiene. ServSafe would fall into that core category, first aid, things of that nature. Even if that skill certificate, if they're broadly required to qualify for entry-level employment or advancement in employment. So we don't want to discount the importance of those types of certificates. You know, they may be helpful, although they may not be recognized credentials for credential attainment. They really can be helpful in obtaining or maintaining employment. So it's very beneficial to provide services that lead to those types of certificates under an IPE. And kind of some of those examples would be like a Microsoft Office specialist. That's not considered a recognized credential. General computer or network security certificates, ServSafe, we talked about that. First aid, CRP, things of that nature. They may be great for obtaining employment, but they're not considered recognized credentials. Or even like a career readiness certificate through your maybe your work center, not recognized credentials. So this is just some technical information I wanted to throw on here. So these are all the data elements. And again, these are coded in the background to your aware fields. But these are the required data elements for credential attainment, or someone needs to be enrolled. There needs to be the attainment. And then for the post-exit information, you can see both for educational, secondary education and post-secondary education, what's required. And this is more technical information than you may need, but I did want to include it. And I'm sure Dina and the IT team can fill in the blanks in more detail here. So we've covered each of the areas that are post-exit measures. And I did indicate I wanted to throw out some of what are considered best practices, some evidence-based practices. And these are things simply, they're talking points. They're things to consider within the agency, but they're identified as having impact. So I wanted to just kind of throw out a couple. One is rapid, meaningful, and sustained engagement. And in this particular slide, you'll note in the lower right-hand corner, there is a link to RSA TAC 2401, which is a whole technical assistance circular on meaningful and sustained engagement with different strategies recommended for VR agencies to embrace. And the evidence is very clear that engagement matters. There is a direct correlation between the timeliness of engagement, both for eligibility and for IPE development. So the sooner that you can get to eligibility and to IPE development, the more likely it is that there is going to be a positive employment outcome. So that doesn't negate from the importance of meaningful vocational guidance and counseling. And rapid would be a misnomer, but meaningful and sustained engagement are important. And the evidence is very clear that it makes a significant difference. Another strategy is really kind of, why did we all get into this? Those of you who are vocational rehabilitation counselors, you know the importance of guidance and counseling. Typically in post-exit surveys, vocational guidance and counseling and the relationship with the counselor are more important than anything. And ideally that leads to a thoughtful goal selection and more sustained employment outcomes. The value of vocational guidance and counseling really just cannot be underestimated. Emphasis on career-focused training and work-based learning experiences. Work-based learning experiences is an evidence-based practice. It has been for a long time. The more experiences kids can have in terms of work-based learning prior to exiting high school, the better off that they're going to be, and the more likely is that they're going to be successfully employed afterwards, and ideally in higher wage careers. So focusing on training and work-based learning is an evidence-based practice. Benefits planning and vocational literacy training. So benefits planning is often an underutilized service. It has a direct impact on successful outcomes. And ideally, it's something that could happen prior to an eligibility determination to make sure that someone understands the impact that earnings has on benefits before proceeding to a plan. And then again, after someone becomes employed, so they don't end up in a situation where they're underreporting and have to pay back Social Security benefits and fully understand the impact of earnings on benefits. A lot of agencies are focusing on or engaging on financial literacy training. Again, so particularly with students with disabilities, so they understand the impact of earnings on work. Another strategy is embracing career-oriented goals that lead to higher wage jobs. Again, we've talked about this enough with high-quality employment, being career-oriented versus job-oriented. Regular follow-up with participants post-hire and exit. Some agencies are embracing strategies where there's regular contact post to exit that promotes job retention and career advancement. Stability, employment, and exit. RSA has really emphasized this to us in meetings that we've had with them, and we emphasize it to all agencies that we work with, that there's no rush to close a file at this point. Stability is key. If someone is not stable in employment or there's any question, keep the file open well past 90 days, as long as it takes to reach the point of stability. And then just as a reminder, employment is always going to be a leading indicator of post-employment success. You know, prior to WIOA, employment was the outcome. So 90 days of employment, thumbs up, you've met your goal. That counts towards the indicator. But under WIOA, it's employment post-exit, second and fourth quarter. So, you know, the more individuals that are employed, it's always going to be a leading indicator to post-exit success. And then finally, I really want to emphasize the mindset shift to a really kind of a fluid versus a fixed IPE to achieve maximum personal potential. And again, this is one of the things RSA is it emphasizes in the meaningful and sustained engagement technical assistance circular. They've emphasized this directly to us. I think in monitoring in those meetings, they emphasize it, but really the focus on the IPE now is that it's not fixed. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can evolve, be amended, and change over time, with the intent being, again, maximum personal potential. So just a couple thoughts and strategies relative to really achieving the intent of those post-exit goals and opportunities maybe for more discussion within your agency. So let's move on to measurable skill gains. And I bring this up because this is not a post-exit measure. It's an interim measure of progress while someone is still a participant in the VR program. So who counts for measurable skill gains? In the numerator, or the individuals that achieve, it's the number of participants during the program year who are in an education or training program that leads to a recognized secondary or post-secondary credential or employment and are achieving measurable skill gains based on attainment of at least one type of gain, divided by who is in the denominator, or those that are eligible, the number of participants during the program year who are in an education and training program that leads to a recognized secondary or post-secondary credential or employment. So let's take another poll. Which of the following is not considered a type of MSG or measurable skill gain? A, achievement of at least one educational functional level of a participant who is receiving education below the secondary education level. B, attainment of a secondary school diploma or its recognized equivalent. C, secondary or post-secondary transcripts or report cards for a sufficient number of credit hours that shows a participant is meeting the state unit's academic standards. D, satisfactory or better progress reports towards established milestones from an employer or training provider who's providing training. E, successful passage of an exam that is required for a particular occupation, or progress in attaining technical or occupational skills as evidenced by a trade-related benchmark. Or F, none of the above. That was a lot to say. So which one of the following is not considered a type of measurable skill gains? And it looks like a majority of you have selected D, satisfactory or better progress reports towards established milestones from an employer or training provider who is providing training. And that is not right. The correct answer is E. All 5 of those that I mentioned, A, B, C, D, and E, are types of allowable measurable skill gains. So let's talk about a few things to know for MSGs. The MSG rate includes participants who are enrolled in an education. Enrolled is key in an education or training program leading to a recognized credential or employment during the program year. This is not an exit-based measure, as I mentioned. It's an interim measure of progress. Prior to WIOA, there were no interim measures of progress. So it is something that an agency can get credit for prior to those exit-based performance measures. MSGs, like credential attainment, require source documentation for it to count. MSGs are documented like credential attainment when they're achieved. It's not the date when you receive the supporting documentation. And for federal reporting, participants are only included in the numerator and denominator 1 time per year. So you can have a student or an individual who, let's take, for example, a student in high school. Typically, there are 2 semesters, a fall or a spring or a fall or winter, whatever they call it. And there are 2 opportunities to secure an MSG. We encourage every agency to secure the source documentation for both of those MSGs. Don't wait to the last semester, and which would be now June, when a report card or transcript may be available. We highly discourage that because you may not be able to get the source documentation for whatever reason after the office is closed if a student doesn't have it. But only 1 MSG counts during the program year. So you may have other state initiatives or your core partners want to count all MSGs, but it's important to note for federal reporting purposes, only 1 MSG will count per program year. What's not an MSG? So MSGs document academic, technical, occupational, or other forms of progress towards a recognized credential or employment. Therefore, VR staff must not document MSGs for achievements that are general in nature, like disability adjustment training would be a good example, or do not lead to specific skills required for a particular occupation. And this kind of stuff can get a little tricky, and it's important to, if there is any confusion, to reach out to your policy contact person or the lead subject matter expert. And if they don't know, it can travel up the line. In the event that someone in the agency doesn't know, we would be the first line of contact to help determine that, because it can vary state by state. So again, this is technical stuff. I did want to include it so you have it. But these are the data elements in the RSA 911 that make up the performance for MSG. And again, they align and are coded in the background based on your aware data entries. I mentioned performance exclusions earlier, and this is a friendly reminder. This is why they're important. So all participants that exit the VR program are eligible for inclusion in performance. And remember, we talked about participants, and they count for performance. So if they have a signed plan, they've been provided a service, they count. Except there are several exclusions. There are actually 5 of them. I had mentioned 1, if someone becomes no longer eligible for VR, but there are 4 others as well. And 1 is that they're no longer available for services due to incarceration or residence in an institutional setting. Second is no longer available for service due to a health or medical issue lasting longer than 90 days. 3 is they've died. 4 is someone has been called to active duty for at least 90 days. In 5, we talked about this one already. They've been determined ineligible after IPE. So if someone leaves the VR program for any of these reasons, they're considered a performance exclusion and they're removed from your denominator. So they won't count against you in terms of your performance calculations. So this is important. It's important that you understand the coding or what you enter in AWARE for program exit is important. And if one of these exclusions apply, it's important to enter that accurately. All right, some other reporting things to know. So let's just talk about the 9/11. Again, we've touched on that already. The 9/11 is submitted on a quarterly basis. It's submitted 45 days after the end of each quarter. There is an opportunity for corrections during that period of time. It's highly frowned on by RSA if it's done in the last reporting quarter as well. So we're now in quarter 4 of the reporting period, which is April 1st through June 30th. And the 9/11 will be due 45 days after the end of this reporting quarter. So we really emphasize that the RSA 9/11, the quarterly report requirement, creates a natural structure for VR agencies and leadership and staff to analyze and improve and correct your data. So the RSA 9/11 is submitted typically 2 or 3 months after that. We haven't received the most recent one, but RSA provides every state VR agency a quarterly data dashboard. And that's your validity check. That's an opportunity to look at the data that you've submitted and see whether or not there are any inaccuracies, there are any outliers, or anomalies that should be or need to be corrected to more accurately represent your submissions. So we really encourage the use of the dashboard, and we're going to share that at the end of this. I'm going to share out some thoughts around the most recent dashboard that RSA has provided, which is from quarter 2. It's a little bit dated right now. Quarter 3 should be available. I was hoping it would be available by now, but should be available anytime. And I want to highlight some points that I thought are relevant and we're talking about. The other report is the annual report, which is the ETA 9169. I'm going to bring one up. If you've never seen it, this is what the state annual report looks like. And it provides information about your expenditures, either providing career services or training services, which is up in this area. It provides information about how you did with performance. And then the remaining information is the participant characteristics of the individuals that you served. So this is available on RSA's website. Everyone has access to it. But if you've never seen one, this is what a VR annual report looks like. So the annual report is a collection of the 9/11 data that you've submitted each quarter. And again, it includes performance information, includes expenditure information, and the participant characteristics as well. Cover that. It's your performance measures that are on there. I want to talk about data validation on Thursday or on next Tuesday, but I'm going to hold on that at this point. But again, data validation is a significant part of the performance accountability system. And we're going to dive into that in more detail, and particularly its relevance to some of the things that you're required to do as part of your corrective action. But we're going to hold on that as a coming attraction. I do want to talk about negotiations and sanctions. And again, this is complex, so it can be overwhelming. I think it is overwhelming, but I want to share it with you because really kind of as a result of some of the work that you've been doing to ensure that you don't have a performance failure, and sanctions aren't applied. And because it's that time of year when performance for the program year is coming to an end, and RSA is going to be looking at performance sanctions in particular for all VR agencies. So the guidance on negotiations and sanctions is in RSA TAC 2002. This was just recently reissued earlier this year. And you can go to it and take a look at that if you wanted to learn more about that. But that is the technical assistance circular that contains the guidance for negotiations and sanctions, and where I draw most of the information that I'm going to share with you. There's also a webcast as well. If you look, there's a link in the lower right-hand corner that was recently done about negotiations and sanctions. So they applied the same across the board to both departments of labor and education, which are responsible for the federal oversight of all the core programs. So all of the core programs kind of followed the same process for negotiation performance, and the sanctions and how they're applied are the same across programs. So the guidance provides two instances when a state may be sanctioned. And one is for a performance failure, and the other is for a failure to report in a timely manner. Those are the two instances where sanctions can be applied. I do want to mention sanctions are applied particularly relative to performance when there are consecutive performance failures. So if there is a single performance failure, what RSA requires is that there is a program performance improvement plan put in place, and also that technical assistance is provided. I'm going to talk more in a little bit what happens when there is a second consecutive failure to a single performance indicator. Let's talk first about the negotiation process. This is how your levels of performance are negotiated, or all VR agencies. The process begins when the state submits a state plan, and the plan is submitted on behalf of both VR agencies. In New Jersey, it would be both the general and the blind agency. So the state plan must include your expected levels of performance, and there are some tools that RSA provides to help identify expected levels of performance, but essentially it's what you think you're able to do. So for each of the indicators for the core programs, you submit an initial submission of the state plan, and it is required to include the expected levels of performance proposed by you, the state. These must be available for public comment. They're eligible for oversight as well, for public oversight. But that's your first effort where you submit it, and then RSA takes a look at it. And then there is the next step, which is negotiating your levels of performance. And there are 4 factors that have to go into this negotiation process. And typically, your leadership, your director, will sit down with your RSA liaison or individuals from the RSA data unit and begin a negotiation process. And the 4 factors that are included in that process are comparing your proposed levels with those of other states, ensuring that the levels involved are adjusted using the statistical adjustment model. And I'm going to talk more about what the heck the statistical adjustment model is in a second. That they support continuous improvement and maximize the federal return on investment. And the last factor that goes into this negotiation process is that they must align the performance goals, align with the performance goals set under GEPRA, which is the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993. And this is how programs are evaluated. It's just a big technical jargon term for how the federal government evaluates the effectiveness of programs. To date, I haven't seen the GEPRA piece being significant, but the other 3 are in the negotiated levels of performance. And then finally, the approved state plan and the required 2-year modification must reflect 2 years of negotiated levels of performance. So you have negotiated your levels of performance for this year, program year 24, and next year, which starts on July 1st, program year 2025, for all of the performance indicators. So just for fun, I threw this in. This is the statistical adjustment model. Actually, it's the old statistical adjustment model. It has been revised to be more accurate. And that's one of the reasons why MSG was not assessed last year, and the state program score was not assessed last year. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second as well. But what the heck is this? It's a regressive, objective regressive model. Yen Yen from the data unit at RSA is a subject matter expertise in this. I don't know if she uses a slide rule and an abacus, but I think it's interesting to take a look at. I couldn't begin to tell you what it means, but it's based on your participant characteristics and the economic conditions in your state. Beyond that, I can't speak to it in too much detail. I will show you, however, what one looks like. So this is provided to states for negotiation purposes. And what you'll see here, this is for employment rate second quarter after exit. These are participant characteristics. So it's important when you enter your participant characteristics and aware that it's done accurately, because it impacts the statistical adjustment model. And in addition to that, it has an impact on negotiating your levels of performance. And then the final piece in the SAM, or statistical adjustment model, is your economic circumstances in your state. And that's a single variable. If I were to scroll down, you'd see New Jersey right down here. So these are the components that make up your statistical adjustment model and go into this whole negotiation process and have bearing on performance. Probably more information that you wanted to know, but that's the SAM. So key data point impact in the SAM, I had mentioned that. Your barriers to employment, that can either positively or negatively impact the SAM. And again, that affects your negotiated levels of performance and ultimately your performance calculation. So it's really important, and can't underemphasize this, that this information be correctly entered in AWARE. So a little bit more about the SAM. Provides two major functions. It's used in negotiating your levels of performance, because it's one of the core requirements, one of those 4 factors in negotiating levels of performance, and again, takes into account the economic conditions and characteristics of the participants. And then it's used at the end of the program year to make an adjustment based on really what happened during that program year. You can have up or downs in your economic conditions in your state, and the SAM is adjusted to account for that. So it's more accurate based on actually what occurred during the program year in your state for your economic conditions, and then again, based on who you actually served during the program year. So those variables are adjusted, and that results in an adjusted level of performance. So we've got all types of different terms being thrown down: your negotiated level, your adjusted level, your actual level. I want to share how that plays out. Before I do that, I want to just talk a little bit about sanctions. So sanctions, the term sanctions refers to a reduction in the governor's discretionary funds by up to 10% of the maximum available amount. In essence, no one wants to be on the governor's naughty list. So that's the first point. The second point is that those reserve funds come out of an award for Title I services or Department of Labor grant funds to the state. the reduction of these funds is not just a detriment to the Title I program, it can affect statewide initiatives that may negatively impact all WIOA core programs. So number one, you don't want to be on the governor's bad list for any reason, particularly because it's going to result in a hit to WIOA Title I funds that can negatively impact a lot of initiatives. And then I want to reiterate that there are two types of failures. We talked about this already: failure to report and a failure to meet your adjusted level of performance. So that's a lot of information about negotiation and sanctions, but really what is the practical application? So let me show you how the calculations work. And the example is credential attainment. So let's say, for example, your negotiated level is 31% for credential attainment. At the beginning of the year, this is what you agreed on. And again, these have been negotiated for 2 program years, but for the sake of the example, for this program year, you negotiated 31%. That's your negotiated level of performance. At the end of the year, you overperformed. You actually did 36%. This is your actual level of performance. Now, here's where the SAM comes in. There's the statistical adjustment model. This is an adjustment level. So based on the economic condition of the state during the program year and who you served, the adjusted level of performance, or what RSA thinks you should be doing, went up 10%. So your adjusted level of performance is 41% now. So this is how an indicator score is ultimately calculated. It's your actual level of performance, which is 36%, divided by your adjusted level of performance, which is 41%. So that gives you an individual indicator score of 87.8%. So long as that score is above a threshold of 50%, it's a pass. If it's below 50%, it's a performance failure. And again, 2 performance failures will lead to sanctions. So let me use the same numbers, but we're going to show this as a performance failure. So again, in this scenario, at the beginning of the year, program year, your negotiated level of performance was 31%. You had an adjustment level of 10%, which raised it, but your actual level of performance was 16.3%. So this is the scenario that played out last program year for your agency. And as a result, the indicator score for credential attainment was 39.8%. Because the indicator score was below 50%, it was assessed as a performance failure. So the actual level, 16.3%, divided by the adjusted level, 41%, results in a program or an individual indicator score of 39.8%, which is below the 50% threshold. So that is why there is a performance failure for credential attainment. You're well on your way to correcting that. So this program year does not, at least at this point, represent a threat for 2 consecutive failures for the same indicator, which would result in sanctions. So I'm super happy to say that. But I wanted to kind of work through this so you have a general understanding of how your performance is assessed. And again, it's complex. It's not easy. As we started out the presentation, nothing about it is easy, but it's important to understand it. And then the final piece I wanted to share on this is your overall state program score, or not yours, but how this is calculated. So this has not been assessed by RSA because of the adjustments in the SAM, getting things right, and because measurable skill gain was not assessed in the past either. But it's highly likely that both measurable skill gains and the overall state program score will be assessed this program year. So the overall state program score is the average of the individual indicator scores for a single WIA core program across performance indicators. So for VR. And I think what I'm going to bring up is just a better example so you can see that and then come back to this slide. But this is hypothetical. So let's say that these are all of the indicators that are being assessed this program year. And these are the program scores: 104, 76, 1, 104, 3, 100, 90, 93.7. So those are all your program scores. The way that the state program score overall is assessed is that it's the average of all 5 of these indicator scores. So what it would look like for all the indicators, you'd be above the threshold, so there wouldn't be an individual indicator failure. And based on the average, your average of all 5 indicators is 95.7%, which is above the 90% threshold for the state program score failure rate. So it would be at 95.7%. This may represent more of a challenge for state VR agencies if it's assessed this year. But that's how a state program score is determined. Let me go back to the slide. And again, in this example, I just threw in a score. 121.8 would be above the 90% threshold for state program score, and there would not be a failure assessment. So again, probably too much information, but it's a good introduction to what will likely be part of our VR lives, certainly will be in the coming future, quite possibly this program year.
Hey, Bill, before you
Yeah.
move on, there was a
Yeah.
really good comment from Danielle Rodriguez asking, are sanctions caused by any 2 performance failures in the same performance year or by 2 consecutive failures across 2 program years in the same category? And I thought since you were on this topic, to clarify that would be a good time.
Yeah, it's as I understand it, it's consecutive failures. I'd have to go back to the TAC because there are some nuances to that to confirm that. So let's hold on that, and I'll share it in writing, or you can look at the TAC specifically. But it's the consecutive failures, and it is a great question, that will lead to sanctions. You have to be given an opportunity to correct it, and I'm 90% sure that that is what the TAC identifies, what the guidance indicates. We'll come back for sure and provide that with confidence in writing. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so that kind of brings it to an end. A lot of the performance stuff I do want to touch in the remaining time on the essential role of data in your program. We'll take a look at last year. We won't spend too much time on that. And then we'll take a look at your data dashboard as well. Grab a sip of water. Okay, let's start out with a poll. How would you feel if you were confronted with the scenario? And in the poll, there is a graphic of a variety of different charts on a screen. One is geographic, a bar chart, a donut chart, several different charts. So how would you feel if you were confronted with a scenario? A, confused. I thought pie charts were dessert menus. B, indifferent. My feelings towards graphs are like watching paint dry. C, cheerful. I feel a light, bubbly sensation looking at graphs. And D, thrilled. Graphs and I are like 2 peas in a pod. All right. Well, the way that it's shaking out is it's actually pretty positive. This is great to see. C is the clear winner at 44%. Cheerful. I feel a light, bubbly sensation looking at graphs. Nice. Really glad to see that. So I wanted to share this. We do have a full data literacy series. It's a 3-part series on our website. We can't underemphasize the importance of data literacy. We think it really should be a core value in VR. It's not going away. It's with us to stay. So here's a deep thought. Data literacy is set to be the most in-demand skill by 2030, with 85% of executives who believe that data literacy will be as vital in the future as the ability to use computers are today. So what is data literacy? If you search it, there are a lot of results. Last time I did it, it was 1.5 or 1.15 million results, but there's some common themes or elements that emerge. So what is data literacy? The main themes that emerge are it's the ability to read data, understand what data is and the aspects of the world it represents. 2, work with data. It's creating, acquiring, collecting, cleaning, and managing data. 3 is analyzing data, filtering it, sorting, aggregating, comparing, and performing other analytic operations. And then 5, communicating with data, sometimes arguing. It comes up quite frequently, which is really kind of defending your position, but communicate with data, using data to support a larger narrative that is intended to communicate some message or story to a particular audience. So that's generally the definition of data literacy. And why does data matter? Well, really it adds to credibility. Data-driven storytelling utilizes factual information and provides credibility and objectivity to our narratives. It's impactful and it's empowering. So each of us has a data story. We tell that data story as an agency through what we report to the RSA 911. That information goes both to RSA, it goes to Congress, and it goes to the president in the annual report to Congress. So, the types of stories that we want to tell are positive. We want to ensure that the numbers reflect things are going well. That safeguards us against a reduction in funds, which has a direct impact on our consumers. So data is the way that we tell our story. So I can't underemphasize data as well. So what's your data story? Take a look at it. This is program year 2023. So remember, we talked about negotiated levels, adjusted levels, actual levels, and the adjustment factor. And again, the adjustment factor is based on your SAM, or the statistical adjustment model, and the variables in your participant characteristics and the economic conditions in your state. So you can see these are your negotiated levels last year. This is the SAM levels applied, or the adjustment factor, and these are the adjusted levels. So the negotiated is the adjusted is the negotiated plus your adjustment factor equals your adjusted level of performance. And then this is what you actually did. So as we went through in the example that I had up before, your indicator score is your actual level divided by your adjusted level. And you see that you did great in all of them. You were above the 50% threshold for an indicator score, with the exception of credential attainment. And again, there's been awesome work that's been done around that to ensure that there are corrections and would not be a repeat this year, which would result in sanctions. So your indicator score was at 39.6% for credential attainment, which did represent a performance failure. Let's take a look at your actual levels of performance compared to other states. So I mentioned the 4 factors that go into negotiation. One of them is continuous improvement. And this is what RSA likes to utilize to see continuous improvement. And these are 4 quartiles. So RSA sorts performance levels into quartiles and likes to see agency movement either within the quartiles or between the quartiles. So last year, if measurable skill gains had been assessed, it had not, you were at 39.9%. And I believe your negotiated level of performance was 49.4% for measurable skill gain last year. So again, RSA likes to see movement. Ideally, it would be nice to see New Jersey bump up one in the fourth quartile or even move into the third quartile. That's the type of improvement that RSA would be looking for.
And Bill, can I just chime in real
Sure.
quickly right here? So I think something that's important for our friends to remember here is this is your percentage as a state, which is why it's always so important to effectively partner with your sister agency. Because when you start looking at those rates, it could be you all pulling down your sister agency, or it could be your sister agency pulling down you. You really don't know, and you don't want to have beef with someone because you haven't met a certain standard and vice versa. So I think it's very important, and I know you mentioned it earlier, Bill, that that statewide annual report is collective data and things of that sort. But I think it's also important to touch on that when it comes to the MSG rates here, that these are all state levels and not just your one agency by yourself.
That's a great point, Crystal, and that's the same for all the other indicators as well. So collaboration, cooperation with your sister agency. If you're, like you, are a state that has two VR agencies, is certainly in your best interest. Okay, employment rate second quarter after exit. You're in the third quartile at 53.4%. You can see what the national average is at 56%, so just a little bit below that. And again, RSA would like to see progress in that. Maybe bumping up a little in the third quartile. Median earnings, awesome, first quartile. That's excellent. And again, I think certainly the minimum wage in New Jersey helps in that particular area, but kudos on that. That's super great to see. Employment rate fourth quarter after exit at 52.8%, real close to the national average, maybe just a little bump up there, either in that quartile or moving on to the second quartile would be great to see. Potential attainment rate, that was the performance failure last year. I know you're not going to repeat that. Feel 99.9% confident, and that'll be up from last year. And you can see the national rate average is about 41%. Then for PY24, your negotiated rate is 42.9%. So, and that's it on that. I want to move on to taking a look at your data dashboard. I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to share it on the screen. Well, hang on for a second. I closed it out by accident. Many folders deep. So, first of all, this is a little wonky because RSA blocks any changes. They lock it. So what I had to do to add even the highlights and some additional calculations is put it in Google Sheets and then transfer it back. But in general, this is, if you've not ever seen this before, this is what the quarterly data dashboard looks like. There's a note section that describes what it is and how to utilize it, how to navigate around. And then there are 9 tabs on the bottom that have a variety of different measures on them. And then there's a spec sheet, and the specs are how each of the data points is calculated in each of these specific tabs. So just a little intro to the dashboard. If I take a look at summary page, this kind of gives an overview of how you're doing. And I made some highlights in the notes on the right that, let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. There you go. That are not on the actual dashboard. Those are just the ads that I had for the purposes of our conversation. So I did want to mention timeliness. RSA always looks at this in monitoring timeliness to eligibility and IPE development. The number of findings and corrective actions around those two pieces is significant. And I talked about this earlier, why that matters, because there is zero question that there is a correlation between timeliness, getting to plan, and IPE. The sooner you can do it, the better. The higher the chances are that there will be a positive employment outcome. You as an agency are doing great. You can go back up to 8 quarters and look. I have done that. And again, you've been doing super great with the timeliness. RSA did add eligibility extensions to this dashboard, and it's just to ensure that agencies are not overutilizing extensions. They're intended to be utilized for exceptional circumstances, not as a workaround, meeting the eligibility timeliness and the IPE development timeliness requirements. So generally for eligibility and IPE, if you're above 90%, that is certainly in your favor. You are consistently above 90%. So, it should be a high five for how you're doing in those terms. That's fantastic. Other things that tend to just stand out, and we had mentioned that, this represents a quarterly validity check and an opportunity to kind of look at and question, are there anomalies? Are there things going on that aren't correct in our federal reporting? And when I look at this, again, I just want to emphasize, the intent of this is to aid continuous improvement efforts. It's not intended to be gotcha or punitive or anything along those lines. That's one of the reasons why RSA started providing this as helpful information to take a look at what you're reporting, because it ultimately impacts your story. So things that stand out in this dashboard, be interesting to look at Q3 if it's consistent, but your training services from the previous quarter, you had 1,353 services that are considered training services. In this quarter, there are only 111. That raises a question, why? Is there an error in reporting? Is there additional training that's necessary? Is there something that's going on in the background with Aware where the coding got mixed up? It just raises a flag. What's going on with that? The attrition rate is something to keep an eye on. I have a detail in that that we'll go over in one of the other tabs. It's important. RSA looks at that. And then the employment rate, I was just noting the drop, 38% this quarter, quarter 2, 52% quarter 1, significant drop. And again, just kind of what's going on. I wanted to highlight participant characteristics only to emphasize again the importance of accurately inputting participant characteristics in Aware. So there are some agencies that I've worked with, for example, that due to a coding error, exhausting TANF within 2 years was 100%. That was not accurate. That impacts the SAM, either positively or negatively. And was an inaccuracy. So the dashboard represented an opportunity to catch that and correct that. So it's important to take a look at participant characteristics. Is there anything that stands out? Is there an anomaly or an outlier that could be seen that should be corrected? Services, I just highlight these because these are some of the items that were identified as part of your corrective action in your monitoring report. And I know some of these are being worked on or have been worked on as a result of my interaction with Gina and the rest of the leadership team as well. But some of the things that RSA identified that need to be corrected is you can see comparable benefits and services, they're all zeros. Are you accurately collecting that information? For example, if someone is accessing Pell or other financial aid, that would be a comparable service or benefit and should be accurately reported for your 9/11. That stands out. Some of the other things that stand out are just, and again, we have identified these. We think these are we're fairly confident these are all coding issues. Job search assistant, job placement assistants, there's zeros there. And vocational guidance and counseling seems to be a catch-all for maybe for all of these. Again, just kind of pointing those things out. This was something that stand out, and I believe as a result of our interaction with you all as well, that this is a coding issue, particularly in terms of having the contracted services for pre-employment transition services recorded accurately. You can see for the last quarter two, the number of students with disabilities who receive pre-employment transition services, 67, which represents only 4% of students with disabilities. And fairly confident again that that's a coding issue that needs to be corrected in the background. But again, the story that's being told here raises a red flag for these types of data points. Measurable skill gains. I'd just like to point this out that this is a nice way to see how you're doing on a year-to-date basis. So for multiple indicators, there is a year-to-date data point, and you can see measurable skill gain in the program year-to-date, 20.1%. This will go up significantly, typically in the fourth quarter. But again, we emphasize if there are two opportunities to secure the supporting or source documentation for measurable skill gains, go ahead and get it. Then you're covered. Something that stands out here, just to me in comparison to most other agencies, was the use of most significantly disabled at 95.2%. That's very high relative to sister agencies. And that would just raise a question about, is that accurate? Is the guidance relative to utilizing that for severity? Is it correct? And it may or may not be, but again, it's just a talking point, and that's what this data represents. These are all starting points for conversations about their level of accuracy and validity. This is an important one. Every monitoring interaction that we've had with RSA, going back as long as I can remember, these are points that they look at. So the type of exit represents points in the VR process when individuals are exiting. And if you look, I did some calculations here at the individuals that are exiting after eligibility, but prior to IPE, it's about 30.6% when you combine the two. And then those that are exiting after IPE without an employment outcome, and you combine when you're losing individuals at eligibility and application, represents 63.9%. These are the opportunities to take a look at, well, are there geographical locations where we're losing more than others and why? Or are there districts that are exercising best practices where there are lower percentages and why? And could those things be replicated? RSA pays particular attention to these data points. And again, it comes up in every monitoring engagement. And then the other piece is, these come up as well. Reasons for exit. Unable to locate or contact, no longer interested in receiving services or further services. Those are the two highest reasons, percentage-wise, nationally, for reasons for exit. And it does lend itself to the question about engagement. If engagement is not timely, then we live in a time when timeliness matters, even outside of VR. If we have to wait, forget it. People leave. They can't wait that long. Is that one of the reasons why those two reasons for exit are particularly high. Then all other reasons at 7%, that's the third reason in terms of frequency nationally for exit outside of competitive integrated employment. But the two that are, or the three that are not competitive integrated employment are these three right here. Then finally, again, I really like this. We talked about this just a second ago, but the year-to-date numbers are just a kind of a benchmark of how you're doing against your negotiated levels of performance. And those are really nice to see. And then the final piece, RSA has included both the SOC titles, the top 10 for the quarter. So the types of jobs that your customers are getting, and then the wages as well. And this is to assess whether or not you're really meeting the intent of WIOA in terms of competitive integrated employment and high quality competitive integrated employment. So that's really just a kind of a quick review of the data dashboard. We can't, again, we think this is such a high value piece of data and really encourage agencies to utilize it across the board. So I believe that, you know, that's a discussion that your leadership team has been having and ideally will support going forward. Okay, so just in conclusion, remember, what's our why? Again, our why is to close the gap. Again, if we look at the numbers, we've made progress. You know, the North Stars that were outlined, that we outlined in the very beginning, you know, your mission, the intent of WIOA, and closing the gap. You know, those are the types of things that are really constitute what our why is. So going forward, ideally, you know, these are our changes. When we look at the graph that's up with the disability and employment rates, that we would see that there would be greater equity, that these gaps would close over time as a result of really kind of fulfilling our why, both our mission, the intent of WIOA, and closing the gap overall. What we have here are just a number of links on this slide relative to everything that we've talked about, in addition to all the sub-regulatory guidance that constitutes what we consider the performance accountability system, the tax, and the DCLs that I have mentioned previously. These are all links to the most recent ones. And there's also, I did include, if you've not been there, just the link to RSA sub-regulatory guidance site that has all of the sub-regulatory guidance that they have issued that's currently active. All very helpful. All right, well, that is bringing our session today to an end. We would ask that a training survey be done if you attended one or all of the trainings. At the conclusion of the trainings, at the conclusion of day 3, we just really, appreciate it. I believe Tina is going to share out both the CR code and the link to our evaluation. And it is absolutely for our own program improvement purposes. Every time we do this, we take into account your feedback and make adjustments to our trainings, every one of them. So if you could do that for us, we would really appreciate it.
Yes, Phil, you're absolutely correct. We're going to send that out with all the source documentation, the PowerPoints, the links on Wednesday at the conclusion of Module 3.
Thank you, Tina. Appreciate that. And that brings us to a conclusion. Crystal, any adds to draw us to a close?
No, I think you did a wonderful job, friend.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, again, it's a fire hose of information. We're super grateful that so many people participated and attended. And again, Tax 1701 is the single most important sub-regulatory guidance. So if you have any follow-up questions relative to performance accountability, really that is your first source of information for learning specifically about the requirements under the regulations for performance accountability. we look forward to tomorrow. We'll get into some other heavy topics with internal controls, and then Tuesday as well. And thank you, everybody, for participating and sharing your valuable time this morning. Greatly appreciated. Thanks so much. Tina,
Thank you, Bill.
Yep.
Yeah. I want to thank everybody again. We were so thrilled to see all of you here. We appreciated the pivot of all of you attending the sessions virtually. And when you're in Aware and you think, why am I hitting this? And why are they asking for this? This training and the other two modules are really meant to give you just a glimpse into the why. Why does that matter? Everyone who enters anything into Aware, if you can tie in what was taught today and think a little bit more about this is why we ask for that information. So it's just to give you that lens. As Bill, like you said, it can be a little complicated, but it's really just to give you that glimpse into the why. And I think that was accomplished incredibly today. Phenomenal job, Bill. Thank you, Crystal, for helping out. And we'll hopefully see all you guys tomorrow morning.
Thanks, Tina.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.